And we are live on YouTube as far as I can tell. And let me let everybody in who's coming in. Good evening, everybody. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Just opened the doors on Zoom. It takes a couple of minutes. We are live on YouTube as well and recording. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We're just letting everybody in the door. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I'm waiting either the minutes or the magic number, whichever I choose at my discretion to get us going. Trust everybody's cold enough out there. Thirty seconds or a magic number, whichever. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Most of you know who we are, but the few who do not, we are the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy. We were founded in 2010 at the recommendation of the Tenants Work Group, which was in place for about 2 years, from 2008 to 2010, with one recommendation, which was the formation of an independent nonprofit to advocate for renters' rights, and that's us. So this evening, as all of our town halls perform, we'd like you all to put your concerns or your questions in the chat. That's the way our staff will be able to monitor and make sure that we get to your questions or concerns at the appropriate time in the town hall. A couple of things up front before I introduce folks who are on the panel. First of all, we are facing a major piece of legislation challenge in Annapolis. Right now, the Maryland General Assembly is considering good cause, or what's commonly known as just cause eviction protection. That legislation passed the Maryland House of Delegates last year, 96 to 37, thanks to the leadership of Delegate Janelle Wilkins, a former board member of the Renters Alliance, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, a current board member of the Renters Alliance, Delegate Mark Corman, who took over the chairmanship of the Environment and Transportation Committee, which handles housing, and of course, many of our friends and colleagues in the Maryland General Assembly House of Delegates who voted for it. And so it sailed through 96-37. However, the legislation stalled in the Maryland Senate, and for reasons that are still perplexing to us. Just cause eviction or good cause eviction law simply says that your lease must automatically be renewed each year or for whatever each period that it is, absent a good reason not to. So we think if you're going to lose your home, that a landlord should have a good reason to evict. Right now, with just 60 days notice at the end of a lease, a landlord could say, I'm not going to renew the lease. If you stay 1 day longer than your lease allows, you are what's known as tenant holding over, or THO, tenant holding over. The landlord can then file for eviction for tenant holding over. And the only thing that the landlord has to show the judge is that they gave 60 days notice. There's no ability to defend against it unless you can prove, and this is very difficult, if nearly impossible for the renter, that there is some kind of illegal activity like racial or ethnic discrimination, religious discrimination of some kind, or that you're being retaliated against, or that you were pursuing rights and services that you're not getting, or that the landlord in some way is just being abusive or misbehaving. But that's all on you in a tenant holding over case. And it's very difficult to find the necessary evidence to defend against it. And most judges, unfortunately, don't want to hear it and won't hear it because they don't have to. Having just cause eviction protection would require that the landlord provide the good reason to evict. It has to be a substantial breach of the lease. So, God forbid, but if you're committing crimes or you're destroying the property of the landlord or some other reason that any Judge Judy anywhere would say, you know, that's good enough, you should lose your home. Absent that, we hope that people do not try to evict anybody for anything casual. Homes have become far too important to people. It's no longer a common commodity. Don't like it, you move. No way. Nearly 40% of this nation, and certainly about 40% of the state of Maryland, live in rental housing, not as a station on the way to owning, but as a permanent way of being housed. And so the relationship of stable, affordable, quality housing to community health, welfare, and prosperity is essential and become a great priority in public policy. So this year, we are waiting on the Maryland Senate to approve that legislation. So far, the co-sponsors are Delegate Janelle Wilkins from District 20 here in Montgomery County. She's been the champion. And Senator Muse from Prince George's County, who is the co-sponsor in the Senate for the Senate version. Couple of concerns. Obviously, the Landlord Association and their allies are fighting very hard to see that this legislation does not come to pass. One of their arguments, which we believe is absolutely false, that they say if you regulate us any further, we will not build any more housing in the state of Maryland. And they believe that the way to protect renters the most is to build more housing, which is, interestingly enough, makes them a whole lot more profit without a whole lot more obligation. So we are concerned that that narrative, which is being driven by the landlord developer industry, is being used to substitute for renter protections. We believe both should take place. We absolutely support the building of more housing, more types of housing, more affordable housing for working and low-income families as well. But we do not believe at all that it is a substitute for protecting renters from abuse and neglect and a lack of dignity and respect in their properties and their homes. So that is our argument. We have evidence to show, despite what the landlord developer industry and their lobbyists will tell us, that in high demand regions, that is where people are demanding to live, like the Washington, D.C. area, that building goes unabated. They don't like it when we have to say you can't raise your rents in double digits. Yeah, that means less profit, but it's profit nevertheless. They don't like it when they say they're going to have to maintain their properties up to code, and even better than that if they so choose, because it costs them a little bit more money and maybe it goes into their profits. We have no problem with them maintaining a profit margin, by all means. We do have a problem with raising profits at the expense of community stability. There has to be a balance. Every industry has responsibilities, especially now the landlord developer industry. It used to be that you could afford a house if you were a working family back in the 1950s. You can't afford a house now in Silver Spring, Bethesda, Rockville. You have to have $500,000 in the bank to buy a house. And with a growing number of senior citizens who are on fixed incomes, downsizing to live in rental housing because that's an easier way to live and a more affordable way to live, we are not doing our best to protect the security and stability of people's homes. So good cause eviction is on the docket in Annapolis. The chair of the committee responsible in the Senate for getting that through is Senator Will Smith from District 20. This is the Judicial Proceedings Committee. And it is really on him to take it to a vote. Last year, he did not. He said he did not have the votes. Bill Watchers said he did. So there's some confusion as to what's going on there. The president of the Senate, Bill Ferguson, is saying that by passing this legislation, basically will anger the landlord developer industry when we need to build more housing. We don't buy it. So one of our colleagues, David Mullins, put the op-ed that we had in Maryland Matters in the chat. I urge you all to read it. We urge everyone to call and write the senators in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, to call President Ferguson and urge him to support this very common sense legislation, which, by the way, won't cost the state of Maryland anything. We're facing a nearly $3 billion deficit that Governor Wes Moore is trying to address. Passing a protection like just cause eviction law, which says, please have a good reason before you evict somebody from their home, isn't going to cost Maryland anything. So, or little or nothing, as far as I can tell, as far as we know from data across the country where just cause eviction protection has existed for decades. So please keep that in mind. That is the most important piece of legislation by far, as far as we're concerned, entirely in the state of Maryland, except for the budget, of course. So please keep in mind, please get active. Pat Beckham always likes to say, renters got to get active, renters got to vote. Well, what we vote for has consequences. And the consequence now is we have a slate of elected officials in Annapolis. Let's get them to do the work we want them to do. So please get active to make sure that we pass good cause eviction law in the Maryland General Assembly this term, which is happening now and ends April 8th. Okay, with that, tonight we had planned to discuss how to build and form and build and maintain tenants associations. And I'm going to do a little share screen here and put one of our outreach coordinators, Tim Wong, in charge of walking us through. We might all kibitz a little bit. And also, let me introduce who I've got here. We have Max Wilberg, who's with the Maryland Service Year program. That's Governor Wes Moore's program, who's doing a lot of our legwork, distributing literature door to door. If you got a flyer under your door inviting you to a town hall, it's probably Max was the one who delivered it there. We have Pat Beckham, who's been working with us for quite some time, who's an outreach coordinator. Tim Wong, as I mentioned before, one of our full-time outreach coordinators, and Melek Demir, who's also a renter that we've worked with for a long time and now is on staff doing a lot of our work for us, especially keeping our calendar, thank God. And of course, most importantly, is Josh Fisher, the Renters Alliance Board of Directors Treasurer, making sure that I say the right things and don't spend any money the wrong way. And of course, we have our two-star renter leaders, Nolu Crockett and Tonga and Vicki Price, whom we'll get to in a little bit down the road. Welcome, ladies, to the Renter Town Hall. So let me turn that over to Tim, and let me do a little share screen here and get us going. There we go. Everybody see that?
How's it? Hi everyone. How's everyone doing? So my name is Tim. So I'm just gonna walk y'all through how to form a tenants association, why you would want to form a tenants association. Just curious in the chat, if anyone is in a tenants association, feel free to just give a shout out. But yeah. So, and I've helped form a couple of these tenants associations all across the county. So one of the things is the main thing is to make your life better where you live, right? So it's an organized way to get together and plan a strategy to improve conditions. And another reason might be to protect your community and improve your community. It's not just about, the conditions in your unit, but also, the common areas and your general neighborhood. Um, and not only that, kind of a side effect is some time to socialize. I think a lot of times, in America, we don't get to know our neighbors enough. There's not always a strong sense of community, so that's one way. Tennis associations is a good way of doing that. Um, yeah, I don't know if any of you all really how many neighbors do you know? And sometimes you don't want to know all your neighbors, but you might find a friend or two from tennis associations from your neighbors. So yeah, we're happy to help you start Tennis Association. So if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to us. Someone will link our email below. But you might ask, how do you start a tennis association? Well, it's really quite simple. So the first thing really is to talk to your neighbors. It only really takes one person to get the ball rolling from my experience. Um, just sometimes there's just one person who's just naturally a leader and they just kind of get the ball rolling. Or sometimes even people, I've seen people who don't necessarily want to lead the association, but they really think it's beneficial, and so they get us to help them to bring everyone together and kind of organize things, and then we can kind of find a leader once the first meeting rolls around. So it doesn't have to be all set by the time you have your first meeting. But if you were to try to start one, talk to everyone and talk, see how everyone's doing, how people like the conditions, see if they're interested in meeting one another. Sometimes some buildings, people are really social and really want to get together. Some other buildings, maybe they're more like, commuter type of people, and they're not, don't really have time to get together. Although I think that you can always make time, but you kind of have to feel out, the mood of your building pretty much. And you don't have to have everyone on board either, to start a tennis association. A lot of times when we have tennis associations, if 10% of the building comes out and meets, we'll roll with that. That's good enough for us. I don't know if Nolu and Vicky, if you ever want to chime in and tell us how you started the meeting, feel free. We'd love to get some,
I've got them joining us a little bit later to
later?
give
Okay.
their part of it. But one thing I want to also throw in, Tim, is if you've got a thought for a tendency, but you don't want to plunge in, we're happy to like have coffee with you, to come over or and just meet with you privately, talk about a strategy in the building. If it's just one person or just a couple of people who want to meet in somebody's apartment or go out to a nearby coffee shop or something like that, there's lots of ways to creep up to this without diving in if you don't want to. Or we can come hell's bells and go door to door and invite everybody in the building, and schedule one in a big room. There's lots of ways to approach this.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. And so we have Vicky. Your hand is up. You want to say something?
Yes, I do. Matt and Tim, I just wanted to give a little background to some of the difficulties in the Just Cause legislation. And this is really a background to even becoming a renter, and this is important. So forgive me for jumping ahead a little bit or behind. I was reading a financial newspaper, it was a couple of months ago, and one of the articles was about a couple who were trying to purchase a house. And they kept being outbidded. No matter what they bid, they kept being outbidded and finally gave up. Well, it turned out that the people who were outbidding them was not actually another homeowner couple or potential homeowner couple. It turned out to be a group of real estate agents, and their intent to outbid homeowners was so that they would have the ability to turn this prospective home or this prospective property into a rental unit so that they could make more money and have discretion to evict. So that's one problem we have in regard to being able to rent. The second one is that the Justice Department has filed charges for price fixing against several real estate companies. One of them, well, two of them, one being Greystar, another Cushman and Wakefield. Cushman and Wakefield is very active in the commercial real estate trade here in Montgomery County and other places. Greystar owns some rental properties in Montgomery County. So I just wanted to let you know that Justice Department is going after them for price fixing in regard to the rentals. So I just wanted to let you know that there is some background to some of the problems we may be having in regard to just cause as well. So I
Thanks,
will
Vicki. I
let you
can
go
tell
with
you,
that.
not to again go back too far on just cause again, but there is plenty of reason that this legislation needs to go into effect. We have seen all kinds of abuse and discrimination and evicting people for retaliatory reasons, for pursuing promised or required services, for forming and working with other tenants, for complaining about double-digit rent increases because property management just didn't like them, or for, again, racial discrimination or something else, utterly unjust behavior. As we like to joke, but landlords say they would never do that. But we say, Moses did not come down with the 10 Commandments because everybody was behaving. So if you are behaving, well, that's terrific. This law won't affect you. But if you're not, this law will require that you do. But anyway, back to tenants associations. Tim.
Great. Yeah. So, but that's a good point, and that's what Vicki just said is something you might not know of, but could be discussed during a tenants association. So that's another reason that you want to start a tenants association. But yeah, so first step was talk to your neighbors. Second step is to plan a meeting. So and we can help you with this. So it's pretty much as easy as scheduling a time when you think everyone else is most likely to be free. Of course, you can't find a time that everyone is going to be free because everyone's schedule is different. But usually we do tenants associations either weekday evenings or during weekends. And it's up to you all, and you can always change when your regular meeting is going to be. But yeah, for the first meeting, just pick a date, and you gotta let people know. So either some tenants associations start like a chat group, like WhatsApp, or maybe an email listserv. That it doesn't have to happen right away, but you have to let people know somehow, and we will help you for your first meeting get the word out. So what we do for you is we print out flyers and we'll put them in people's doors. So yeah, we're happy to do that for you. And you gotta pick where you want to have your tenants association. And keep in mind, forming a tenants association is protected by law. Your manager cannot retaliate against you for forming or being part of one. So, and they also have to let you, if there's like a communal room, they also have to let you use the room once a month for, I think, 2 hours is what it is. But 2 hours is all you need, really.
Well, I'm not sure about the hours, Tim, but I am sure that it has to be for free.
Right. Yeah. I forget exactly how much time, but they have to let you use the community room out, at most once a month. But that's also as many times as you want to meet typically. And if your place doesn't have a community room or something like that, then you can always do a public location. We've had meetings at Panera Bread. We had a meeting at like a local school. With those, you always want to try to plan it in advance. Get the reservation. And also with your community room, you also have to reserve it with your manager. You can't just kind of take it over. You have to make sure they know. Yeah, and then and for this meeting, we want to tell people why we're meeting. So we'll put that on the flyer. And then we'll bring all the supplies. Typically, for the first meeting, you want like some kind of paper to write everyone's ideas down, comments. And if it's during dinner time for your first meeting only, usually we'll bring some from some dinner. So usually pizza. Well, that's for Matt typically to decide, but usually that's what we've done.
We'll call it refreshments. I'm not sure if we're bringing a full rotisserie gold dinner, but
Right.
we will bring some refreshments from time to time for a good faith effort by a new tenants association.
Yeah, steak and lobster, right? Okay, so um,
If Tim's buying.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's the initial meeting. And once and then obviously you can get the word out just by word of mouth too. And then once you get to the meeting time, is the first meeting is really getting to know each other, kind of feeling out everyone's personalities. And sometimes, we have to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. Sometimes there are more, stronger, more vocal opinions, but we also want to get the opinions and thoughts of the people who are a little bit more quiet. So, that's something to think about. So we'll do introductions, and then we'll explain pretty much like kind of a summary of what I'm telling you all about tennis associations. You kind of will to tell everyone that. And and try to get people to get on board. The first meeting is I would say the most important one because it's going to set the tone for all the rest of the meetings. Because some people will make it to I think a lot of times people will make it out to the first meeting, and sometimes they'll decide then and there whether they want to come to the subsequent meeting. So we really want to nail down the first meeting. And a lot of times, what people talk about is issues that people are dealing with. So keep in mind, a tennis association is just to improve the conditions of where you live. It's your housing situation. It isn't, it's not like a political group. It's not. It can be social, like you can plan like parties and get together, but it should never be, like dividing, right? Like issues that like politics can be dividing. It should never be. It shouldn't be religious. That's like strictly one religion. It shouldn't be, yeah, either of those things or anything
Let me chime in there, Tim, just to emphasize that point. The one thing that all renters have in common, and the reason why you come together for a tenants association, is obviously to make sure that your home is secure, that the landlord-tenant relationship is well conducted, that the quality of life in the building is good, that you all are treated with dignity and respect, that people know their neighbors to the extent to which you want to, that you build the community. These are things you have in common. And I think what Tim is emphasizing correctly, that this is not any other purpose is not the purpose of the tenants association. If you want to be the Democratic coalition of whatever building, that's fine, but that's not the tenants association, or the Republican, or the Independent, or the whatever, or the Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever. These are great. Form those clubs, do those things, do them as you will. But the one thing that is assured that everybody has in common is the quality of life in the building, and what being in that building as a tenant means collectively. That's what a tenants association is about. If you go in any of these other directions, you might risk losing large factions of the building. And that's not what you want to do. There is a place for those other things, but not in the tenants association, in our experience. This is not to say don't do it. It's just a free advice.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So, and I see in the chat we got Colesville Tenants in the chat. So, welcome. Thanks for coming out. And they brought up a great point, which is starting your or having meetings on a consistent basis. So they have their meetings the last Monday of the month. Now, when you're starting out, I think meeting once a month is fine. But let's say you get established, things are going good, there's not too many issues. You can decide to meet, once a quarter, which is what we would recommend to be the minimum amount of times that you would meet before people kind of forget about it. But yeah. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I also think I saw Carrie on the chat. She started a tennis association recently too. So let me know in the chat if you want to, say anything real quick about tennis associations or anything like that. But yeah, so that's essentially the first meeting, getting to know each other, and figure out what issues you want to work on together. And usually that's like issues that are, you're facing with the common area, the management, things that affect you all. Let's say sometimes people have issues like with their unit, like let's say that their appliance, like their fridge isn't being fixed in their own unit, and that's something that you can bring up. Maybe other people have the issue, then you can kind of get together and bond over that. But if it's like individual issues, a good leader would try to help those people individually, kind of talk to them after the meeting or on another time to kind of leverage the county enforcement mechanisms to get that fixed. Yeah. So we got a question from Sandy. How long are you protected from retaliation for forming a tennis association? I'll let Matt answer that, kind of elaborate, but my impression is that so retaliation laws usually, it's a little bit murky. I'm not a lawyer, and neither is Matt. Neither is anyone here. Maybe there's a lawyer in the chat, but usually 6 months from an act of that, like an act like making a complaint or forming a tennis association should be, under the eyes of the law. I think that would definitely be covered. I don't know, Matt, if you have
Well, let me jump in. Yeah, Tim, first of all, retaliation against a tenant pursuing their rights in any way or filing a complaint or forming a tenants association is illegal in Montgomery County and in the state of Maryland. Which is not to say that we haven't seen abuse of those laws, and which is another reason to form a tenants association. Active individual tenants are far more vulnerable to abusive landlords and property managers than tenants associations that work together. So we have seen it, and let me chime in with our experience up the road here. We've been doing this for a long time, and there is a property up in Wheaton called Arrive Wheaton. And I can say in all honesty that it has been the worst property management that I have ever dealt with. And I've dealt with some doozies, but these ones were really quite something, to the extent where they were issuing threats by letter, including to me, banning people from the office and telling them that if they came into the office, they would be prosecuted for criminal trespass. Absolutely nuts and rude, abusive, and threatening, and actually pursued a number of people in the building with eviction because we did not have just cause eviction protection. We have, in one case, we filed a number of complaints, including supported court action. But I can say that we learned today that both of those property staff are no longer with the company. We could say that. So over time, active tenants, especially when they work with us, but collectively filing complaints as they have every right to do, not taking it. If you're getting abused and somebody's treating you poorly, don't take it. You are in a business relationship with these people. You pay good money to live in your private home, and you expect in exchange for that rent, proper services, and of course, dignity and respect in a professional relationship. Landlords and property managers are not your friends. You can be friendly, but the main reason that you're in a relationship with them is the business of renting your home. And so, we joke in tenants association meetings especially when we're getting started. I don't understand when we hear from some tenants that they put up with some things for weeks or months at a time. My refrigerator hasn't been working for 3 months. What? I wouldn't take that for 2 hours. So, not being afraid to demand what you're entitled to, obviously politely and amicably, but to do so as a business relationship where you expect something in return for what you're paying for. So you are protected, but bear in mind, if there's no tenants association, you're even less protected. I think that's the
Power
most
in
important thing.
numbers.
Right. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah. And that kind of goes that kind of answers a question in the chat if there's any drawbacks before forming a tenants association. Yeah, I mean, I think retaliation is can be an issue. However, it mainly is something for the leader to deal with, because usually the leader is the most visible person. They have to request the room, so then management will know who it is. If you're just a member of the association, like you're not, public, you're not like the leader of it per se, management shouldn't find out who you are, ideally. So a lot of times when you meet, you don't tell, you don't advertise to management who came to the meeting, right? And if management is there, you can actually ask them to leave. They're not, if you want them there, that's sometimes we have management come to meetings so we can tell them directly, but we always let people know that management is coming, and it's always by invitation only. So sometimes that is an issue.
But it is part of the law, Tim.
Yeah.
When you have your meeting, it is a private meeting. And so your agenda is your agenda. Who you invite is your agenda, is your invitation. And so property staff have from time to time said, we'll give you the room, but I want to be there to see what people have to say. No. We want the people to feel confident that what is being discussed is only at the purview of the tenant leaders or your neighbors. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And if you ever have a problem with that, we're here to help. I've been in numerous meetings and set up meetings over the years where we had those kinds of problems. One property manager insisted that they would send their videographer. We said, no, you can't do that. We had one who hid amongst the crowd until somebody passed me a note and said, that's the property manager. Then we asked her to leave. She said she wouldn't go. We said, well, we're not having any discussion until you do. So then she called the lawyer, and the lawyer said, you better go. So, it does happen from time to time, but for the most part, property management sit up and go, hey, these people are getting together and getting organized. Maybe I ought to do my job the right way and be good, the way folks do when suddenly people are being held accountable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. And just to further to complete a question in the chat, if there are any other drawbacks. There's not many drawbacks to running a well-run tenants association. I think the main drawback is you have to put time and effort into making it happen, right? So you want to make sure it's worth everyone's time to have a tenants association. Carrie brought up a good point regarding retaliation. If you want to, I mean, this is just good practice in general for whenever you have these contractual relationships between you and your landlord, is document everything, right? When you communicate with your manager, try to do it in writing, like over email. When you ask for the room, ask over email. That's something that is great advice. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, back to the forming a tenants association. So just to recap, we kind of went off tangent a little bit. So step 1, talk to your neighbors. Step 2, plan a meeting. Step 3, have the meeting, get to know each other. And then the 4th step is to formally propose to have a meeting, a tenants association, and kind of set the stage for it. So kind of we have to remind everyone why we're meeting, what we're trying to do at the tenants association, and see if you can get people to agree. Like, ask everyone honestly. I mean, because it is a lot of time you have to, well, not a lot, but like 1 or 2 hours a month. And I know that everyone's really busy, right? So to get everyone together for 2 hours or 1 hour a month, it is a commitment. So see if people actually want to do that. I mean, sometimes there's although we would want to have a tenants association in every building, sometimes things aren't right. Like the timing isn't right to have one right then, but doesn't mean you can't have one later. So once you decide you want to have a tenants association and meet regularly, then you can kind of formalize it with things like bylaws or rules that you want to have. Elect people to be your leader, to be your treasurer. If sometimes tenants associations have dues for simple things. It doesn't have to be too much. It could be like $10 a year or something like that. Just to print stuff. Sometimes if you want to increase it, you could have extra money to have parties, to have food, refreshments, things like that. So that's something that you have to decide for yourself. Like no tenants association is the same as another one. They're all different because everyone's building has different type of people in it. So it's you can really make it your own.
Tim, let me go through a little bit about the different types of tenants associations that we've seen. We have kind of an A through D kind of classification. The first lowest level, which is still fine. It's just a handful of folks getting together to talk about issues in the building from time to time. That's fine if that's the level of organization that you want to have. The next level might be actually having more regular meetings with just active people in the building and setting up something where you actually have a name, you actually call yourself as a tenants association, but you don't necessarily have officers. Then the next level is you actually do have officers and you start to get more formally organized and start to have maybe rules of who's going to be an officer and what the obligations are. And then the A-level standard, which I think was what Tim was describing, which is that you actually have officers, you actually have bylaws that explain how officers get elected, what their terms are, what their responsibilities are, that you actually have a regular schedule of meetings, whether initially that's once a month or always once a month or once a quarter down the road or as needed, always in between, where you have a treasury. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. We've seen a lot of tenants associations struggle with money. Even if it's $100, it can be very dear to people. But making sure that you have some money so you can print some things or maybe have some hors d'oeuvres or cookies or something like that. And also being able to separate folks who show up once in a while from those folks who pay dues and therefore may be entitled to vote if that's what your bylaws say. So, a more formal structure. And of course, we do not recommend, but you can certainly do it. We've seen some tenants associations become actual formalized nonprofits. I've seen that in New York, where in large buildings where you have hundreds of people in the tenants association, and they're very powerful, and they have a nonprofit organization, and they have thousands of dollars in the bank, and they can hire their attorneys or whatever. We don't recommend that. That's asking a lot. But certainly somewhere between A to D, people can get together and decide to have some kind of building community, get to know your neighbors association, all the way up to the more formal officers, bylaws, regular meetings, and so on. And I think, Tim, I would also underscore the importance of the right kind of agenda setting. When we're talking about drawbacks, one of the things that can be a real drawback in a tenants association, it's common that they come together because there are problems in the building, because people have complaints. But it won't last if that's the only thing you're talking about. So if people think that the only thing that the meeting is going to be is a harangue, eventually, if they solve their problem or they're just not feeling it, eventually they're going to go, I don't want to go to the complaints meeting, even though complaints are often part of the agenda, but may not be the entire agenda, which is something our colleagues, Nolu and Vicky, will talk about in just a few minutes. So, just keep that in mind. There's lots of ways of approaching this.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And just to go through, there was a couple questions in the chat. One was, can you expect the landlord to email your tenant association flyers out? Matt can reinforce, but I believe that the landlord doesn't have to do that. They have to let you borrow like a community room, but they don't have to like email everyone about your meeting. I mean, they can, but yeah, they don't have to. Is that right, Matt?
Well, yeah, that's let me just raise something here. I'm gonna, we'll email out in our next newsletter this brochure. As I assume everybody's had a chance to read everything I put up here, be strategic and so on. Let me set that aside for a minute, and let me pull up the law so that people understand what your rights are. Association resources and its right to organize. This is one of my favorites. Let me share screen that particular document. All right, can everybody see that? Okay. So you have the right to organize, to form, join, meet, and assist one another within or without tenants' organizations, to meet and confer through representatives of their own choosing with landlords, or if you choose to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of mutual aid and protection, and to refrain from such activities if you don't want to do so. Tenants and tenant organizations have the right of free assembly in the meeting rooms and other areas suitable for meeting within the rental housing during reasonable hours and upon reasonable notice to the landlord to conduct tenant association meetings. A landlord must not charge a tenant organization or a group of tenants seeking to form a tenants organization a fee for the first meeting of each month held to discuss landlord-tenant issues, but the landlord may charge a reasonable fee for other uses of the meeting rooms or common areas. By the way, this was a law that the Renters Alliance fought for back in, when was that, 2015. We finally got it passed, the Renter Protection Bill. It used to be that they could charge you an hourly rate to form a tenants association in the room, and most people couldn't do it. The charge must not exceed, if you have to pay for it after your first meeting, the usual schedule of fees that they charge for the use of the room. The landlord may also impose reasonable terms and conditions on the use of the meeting rooms or common areas if those terms and conditions do not undermine the purpose of this section. So one of the things that we've seen is a landlord will say, well, I want a $500 security deposit to use the room. No. So it has to be reasonable. And obviously, the purpose was to make it so that regular folks could afford to form a tenants association. If you have to put up a ton of money for a security deposit, that would undermine the purpose of this section. Tenants and resident organizations have the right to distribute freely and post in centrally located areas of the rental housing literature concerning landlord-tenant issues if the origin of the literature is properly identified. So we do this all the time. And many landlords and property managers will say you're not allowed to distribute, or what they would say solicit, in our building. This is not soliciting. This is tenant organizing. And the rule of thumb has always been, even though the Renters Alliance takes this law literally, but it used to be whatever the property management or the landlord does to distribute information is the same right that the tenants have. Now, they might say we don't distribute door to door. We've never seen that. We've seen door to door. When they want to talk to you, they put it right under your door or on your door. So you have that right. If they have a place in the elevator to put up their own information and announcements, then you have that right. You can certainly put it up in the mail room, in the community room, in the laundry room, and other information. Now, of course, we expect all tenants to be respectful, not to tear down their literature and put yours up, or to put too much around, or when the meeting is done, to take it down with you, or at least, be respectful of the community rules and norms. Tenant organizations may file complaints under this provision, and we urge people to do that if the property management goes around and tears down your posters, that's against the law. And you should file a complaint. First, you should tell the property management it is against the law. By the way, that's what I did at Arrive Wheaton, and then they banned me from the office. They, and again, they're no longer working there. But you should make sure that you exercise your rights. So if they're disrupting the formation of a tenants association, we'll work with you on that. We have a lot of experience in making sure property management knows that that is an illegal activity and that they shouldn't do that. Then we can escalate it to filing a complaint with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and possibly even pursuing damages if the printing costs are costing money or they're doing harm to the tenants if they violate your rights. So you have the right to distribute literature and invite people. You do have to make sure that the source of that literature is clearly marked. That's why we usually help, because we say the source is the Renters Alliance working with the residents in whichever building. So that takes care of it that way. But when you establish yourself, you could say, hey, look, it's the Colesville Towers Tenants Association, and here's our email if anybody has an issue or wants to contact us, so it's clearly identified. Okay, so everybody knows their rights based on the law. What else, Tim?
So, yeah, we are overtime a little bit, so I'll just run through this really briefly. There's a quick question in the chat about if there's management staff who also live in the building, could they be considered residents or tenants? It's really up to you. We've seen a lot of what we've seen usually is they're not allowed to come to tenants associations, but you know, if they're cool and you want to invite them, that's up to you. So yeah, just to continue on, so a couple tips for running a successful tenants associations. We kind of went over this a little bit, but having regular meetings, adopting a good agenda, like Matt was talking about, keeping it focused. You should always end and start on time, because people, now there's nothing worse than a meeting that drags, which is why I'm trying to hopefully end this meeting on time. So yeah, we'll try to do that, and then yeah, eventually have some structure. Like you can't have two, like for example, two leaders trying to do two different things. So try to have that all squared away. And have like a process for trying to agree on things together to make change and communicate with your landlord. A lot of times what we've seen from tenants associations is they create their own email. Like for example, it's like it's like your apartment complex at gmail.com, something like that, like just so that you don't have to use your personal information, and the email can be passed on along with the leaders.
Let me Tim, let me just say that the issue of using the internal listserv of the property management, that's up to them. They don't have to do that for you. But what they can't do is block you from using it yourself if you normally had access to it. So if there's an internal listserv that allows you to post information to your neighbors, and the property management says you can post whatever you want, but nothing about the tenants association, that would be illegal. So in our view, obviously, you're allowed to communicate the way they communicate, and they cannot be hostile or act to obstruct your right to form a tenants association. Tim, thanks for all of that. Given that it is 7:55, let me move on to our two experienced tenant leaders to talk a little bit about their experience and challenges. Let me move first to Nolu Crockett-Ntanga, who's been at this work for quite some time, and we've had the pleasure of working with her from the beginning and her people at Sanctuary Apartments.
Well, first of all, thank you to Matt and the Renters Association. I tell you, we just wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the Renters Association and really holding our hand and walking us through the process. We have a long story, but the short version of the long story is we're trying to be like my colleague Vicky over there. I mean, our association actually only started in January of 2019. Our building opened. It was a brand new building for seniors, 62 plus, and it opened in August of 2018. And it's a beautiful building, great location. You know, we're between Four Corners and whatever that other street is, but we're not far from Four Corners and Long Branch. We're sort of like in the middle there. So great location, all of that. Very excited about moving into the building. And then after 3 or 4 months, I tell you, the management, you know, the on-site management, they don't know nothing. They're not trained. They speak to us. I'm 74 years old. Excuse me. Speak to me with respect. I mean, speak to my grandchildren with respect. So we started having problems, and a few of us, it was just like you all said before we found you, Matt, because we were sort of stumbling in the dark. You know, a few of us started talking like, wow, this is not right, and that's not right. Maybe we need to get together. And somehow we heard about the residents of the Renters Alliance, and you all just really helped us. And we did basically everything that was outlined in terms of talking to people. I will say one thing for us, many of us older adults, is we just not into the technology like you younger people are. Okay. I'm from Chicago originally. I was there in 1968 when Fred Hampton was murdered. And that was my first political experience, was getting rid of the then person who hired him. So what I learned from the Mayor Daley, the first administration, is that nothing takes the place of face-to-face, door-to-door, meet you at the mailbox or whatever kind of interaction. So we have struggled. We've had a number of successes. The major problem we still have now, and I started a list of how many on-site managers have we had in 6 years. I'm guessing about 14, you know, including some temps, because they are inexperienced, they don't know, they talk to people bad, and, you know, they're gone. So where do you want me to go with this, Matt? Should I talk about our successes in the limited time we have here? Unmute yourself, Matt. Matt, you're muted. I know.
Jeez.
Go ahead.
You know, no matter how many times I do this, we can make a comedy show about Zoom.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about how you started to recruit specifically? How did you recruit your members in the first place? That would be the good place to start.
Okay, so when we started in January of 2019, and we had started back in December of 2018 trying to talk to management saying, you know, this is wrong, you know, or this, we want this or whatever, we got absolutely nowhere. So 2 or 3 of us, just like you all said, we met up in a community room, because we do have one, and said, you know, we need to see if anybody else is on board. As a matter of fact, I think one of our tenants, Melinda, is on the call, and she was one of the ones who came on board early on, because recognizing, and she can chime in at the whatever time you say, Matt, to recognize that we have rights and we needed to let people know. Now, since we are a so-called affordable housing place, I have found that many people do have that fear of retaliation and so forth. And so what we did with your help, Matt, was let people know about their rights, that you are protected as long as you're paying your rent on time, you know, that you are covered with this and so forth and so on. So we basically went door to door, talking to people, finding out what their problems were. We had in the beginning a lot of, and we still have some problems with the building, which apparently is not unusual with a new construction. And so as we were trying, first of all, asking, is everything okay? And, you know, in half the places, things really were not okay. And so we got together really by the old-fashioned way of talking to people, finding out what they thought, and also trying to bring in the point. We have one tenant here who's really just a star at organizing social activities. It's like, it's not just about complaining about stuff and trying to get stuff fixed all the time. Can we have birthday celebrations for every month? Can we do, you know, figure out transportation? We're not far from the Long Branch Senior Center, but a lot of our people don't drive. So how can we make life better for our residents. And as I think it was Tim who rightly said, if you get 10%, right? We declare victory. And of the 10%, if you could get 5% of the 10% to actually be active and do something. But we talked to people, we made the point, even in terms of, having the regular meetings, what derailed us was COVID. We were having monthly meetings, we were having birthday celebrations, we were making some progress because one of our first big wins was our community room was locked. Why are you going to have a community room and it's like locked all the time? The only time it was open, it was in a few little hours. The people, the management was here. That's another whole story. But we achieved 24/7 access to our community room so people could go in there and watch TV or go and sit and play cards or the bingo babes, as they call themselves, and so forth and so on. So the way we did the recruiting was finding out from people what they wanted. Was it, all you want is you want your stove fixed and you're good. And we made it clear that we were not here to deal with individual apartments. But if 8 people got the same stove problem and we know about that, then we can present that as a tenants association. So,
and as I recall, Nolu, you all invited all the seniors in the beginning years. The senior staff from the property would come to your meetings, and the regional people would come to your meetings. Again, like you say, there are rises and falls in tenant meetings and in property staff. The turnover and the incompetence of property staff countywide is an issue of the Renters Alliance is trying to tackle by urging the council to pass legislation that requires property staff and landlords to be trained and certified in order to work in Montgomery County. That is a discussion for another town hall. But also, Nolo, as I recall, and this may be common, and we've seen it in other tenants associations, you all took the bull by the horns. You created the tenants association. You're all good at organizing naturally from your own experiences and your careers. But there were also some factions within the building that didn't want the tenants association.
Very true. Very true. And it's really interesting because now here we are, 6 years down the road, and they're having problems. And like I said, things rather fell apart after COVID, and we haven't quite built up, we haven't built back up to once a month, which is how we used to meet and use that as a birthday celebration and so forth. So what we started doing is on an as needed basis. Like, for instance, we had one of these property managers who sent out some just erroneous information, put it in everybody's door about when the late fee kicked in. There was an argument about we couldn't post stuff and so forth. So what we have started in the last year, at least, is when we have these issues, we come together as what we call the core group. We did do the formalizing in terms of, we have bylaws, we have all of that, but we found that we just couldn't get the support that we needed. Like, for instance, in our parking lot, I think it was last year, where 3 or 4 cars were vandalized on the same night. Now, people who know me know I'm in my house when the sun goes down, but there are other people out driving an Uber, they work for UPS, and where our building is situated, you really can't see it from the street. So it's like, can we get a phone tree to call the 3rd District Police to y'all just drive through so we couldn't even get people to do that. So those of us in leadership, and trust me, I was not trying to be a leader. I really was not. I was just trying to have a nice place to live and stand up for my rights. And somehow here I am. But anyhow, we found that we just were not getting the support that we needed. People want their rights and want things to be okay, but didn't nobody want to do anything other than the 5 of us who were working, and then we just got burnt out. So that's where I am now. I am burnt out.
But we did attend a tenants meeting with you all not long ago, and there was about 30, 40 people in the room. I did see that you held a very strong tenants meeting, bringing in now the county council president, Kate Stewart.
Yes.
Burnout, as you may, I think, by the way, at least half the nation is extremely burnt out right now for all kinds of reasons. But it is not unusual to have ups and downs in tenants associations. It is also, as Tim said, getting 10% or whatever it is. Unfortunately, democracies, including local organization democracies, nonprofits, community activist groups, civic organizations, are often run by a small fraction of the overall population of those they serve. So that's not unusual. So one does not want to get frustrated with being the ones who are leading the charge while so many others benefit from the work that you
Exactly.
do.
Exactly.
It's the story of the little red hen. Nobody wants to help you bake the bread, but everybody wants to help you eat it.
That is so true.
And that is a very common scenario. But it is also, there are times, if you have experience doing this, where you'll come into a tenants association meeting and there's 100 people there and they are applauding because you brought in somebody who's going to talk about how to grow great plants in an apartment building, or because you're honoring a new member of your community, or a birthday from somebody who hit 100 years old or 21 years old or something, and that you're building community and you go, wow, I've got a tenants association and we're active. And I think, one has to also remember that that is more important and more powerful than the lows.
Yeah, that's
also
absolutely right, Matt. And Vicky, one of the reasons I have many reasons I love the Renters Alliance is we share and we learn so much from each other. I want to hear Vicky. I mean, she was at her organization for 17 years. I haven't even made 7. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm like, somebody come and take over or whatever. So I need to understand, as you say, the ups and the downs, how to get over it, especially when you're not, or we seemingly are not getting the support until we have a problem, like when they sent out that erroneous letter about when the late fee kicked in, and then they sent out an erroneous letter about the 2-year lease term, and then they weren't giving people the lease summary, and and on and on. And I recognize that some people, our problems may not sound like much when people are dealing with rats and mold and all the really really other things, but it's like they advertise this place a certain kind of way, and we had an expectation, and then we get up in here and it's like, no.
Although I got to tell you, Vicky, I mean, Nolu, I like your apartment building. It's
It is a great building.
it's
It
pretty
really
good.
is. It
And the
really
location is
something
pretty
work.
good. But I think you all have done a great job.
Thank you.
And the ups and downs come with it. That's the nature of it. It's not just you. And I will say that the Renters Alliance is here to help buck you up from time to
Yes.
time. We can come in and take over for a little while and bring pizza or Tim's
Yeah, we're
turf and
sort of
surf.
there. We're there, Matt.
Tim's
Send in
buying-
the cavalry.
Yeah,
Send-
right.
yeah.
We can come in and do it because I do think that you could all be satellites, or we could also, on a giant level, a county and regional level, be part of a constellation of tenants associations that, like on this town hall, can meet from time to time, be a congress of tenants association leaders, something like that. But to talk about, and thank you, Nolu, to talk about, maintaining a long-term tenants association with all kinds of ups and downs and all kinds of challenges, but maintaining a robust tenants association is one of our longest term tenants association term leaders, Vicky Price. So let me turn it over to Vicky to tell us about her challenges and successes in heading what I think was the Charterhouse Tenants Association for almost 20 years, maybe longer. Got to unmute, Vicky.
Okay, I did. There I am. Right. Well, first of all, before I say anything, I'd like to tell everybody who's participating to get a copy of the Landlord Tenant Handbook. It is now available, unfortunately, just online. And that's a bit of a problem for those of us who like to have paper in our hands, but still it's available. And the reason I say that is because I have been continually surprised by property managers who do not know landlord-tenant law. I mean, really and truly. And as we've talked about, particularly in this program and others, some of the actions that we have seen them put into place with us as residents basically is it's a problem of them not knowing landlord-tenant law. So I suggest everybody get a copy of that. When I first moved into Charter House, it had been an assisted living, an expensive assisted living business. But then the owner basically went bankrupt, and housing decided to take it over. So it turned into a senior building, a regular senior building, independent living. And for the first 6 months, we had a really, really good management company. But then after that, it went downhill, and it never really got better. But the advantage we had was that there was a residence council already formed and had been formed for a number of years. So it was just a matter of those of us who wished to take over from the residents who were leaving office. So we had a very long, let's just say, officer list. So we had our president, we had first and second vice president, then we had a treasurer, and I'll say why in a moment. We had a treasurer. Then we had the corresponding secretary, that was me, and I eventually became corresponding secretary and community liaison, which I thought would lessen my load, but it doubled it. Then we had our recording secretary, and we had to also add our sergeant at arms. So we made sure we had a bouncer in case the meeting got a little rowdy. But in any case, we did have a treasury because there were 214 apartments in the building. There still are. And my job was basically to write up the agenda. And actually, I developed the agenda, wrote up the agenda, and distributed a copy to everybody. So that took some money for the ink and the paper, but that wasn't an issue because the dues were only $6 a month. $6 a year. But I will say that when we invited the Renters Alliance, we had 75 people who showed up at that meeting. I was really surprised. It was wonderful. So as you said, the agenda was such that it was very formal. It was rather a loosely based Robert's Rules of Order. So the board president introduced opened the meeting, but I basically ran the meetings for most of those years. The one thing that I think was very helpful to our meetings, not just to discuss the issues we had with the property or with management, but our meetings really improved once we started bringing in guest speakers. And one was the big gun who was Gloria Laylaw's top man, gave an excellent presentation on medical literature for seniors and basically some laws regarding seniors and insurance. And at that point, that's when we started bringing in the legislators. We've had Jamie Raskin in twice, once when he was our state senator and he practically lived there. We had county council members come in. The last speaker we had was actually U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, the day before COVID lockdown hit the state of Maryland. Oh, thank you. We were very, very active politically. So we took bus trips to Annapolis. We testified in Annapolis. We testified before the county council. One was the air conditioning bill that got passed and was introduced by Council Member Tom Hucker. And I'm very proud of that because at Charter House, we had several neighbors who died from hypothermia. That was a terrible tragedy. And one of those was so bad that the residents, our board, and the residents who called emergency services went to the Gazette newspaper. It ended up in the Gazette. We did have problems with unjust eviction or attempted eviction, we'll put it that way, which is very relevant to this meeting. We had two neighbors who had just moved in and told the property manager that their units were not in move-in condition. And instead of making sure that the problems were basically resolved, she gave them a notice of eviction, and they had just moved in. So I'm an HOC client, and I'll say that in a minute. It doesn't bother me to say that. But I went to one of the bigwigs at HOC and told him what had happened, and he said they will not be evicted. There's no cause for them to be evicted. They need to have whatever's wrong with that apartment taken care of. And we had another case, and it really hurts me to talk about this, but we had an embezzlement case by staff member, management staff at Charterhouse. So I ended up working with Secret Service, the police, and we had a number of 50 residents who were victims of check counterfeiting, 3 of identity theft. But the then manager basically gave an eviction, let me put it this way, a non-renewal of lease to one of our board members. And I think I'm not going to speculate. And it's because she basically had some information, I believe, that could have been disclosed. But at any rate, she gave her this notice of non-renewal of lease, and our pro bono attorney, and yes, we had a pro bono attorney, and I assisted him for about 15 years with processing some of his pre-legal cases. But anyway, so I assisted him with that. And this is one case where our treasurer was a holdover and won the case. She won her case because all of us came together to assist her. And one of the reasons, as Matt pointed out, is that landlord was not able to prove her case. And secondly, she illegally had some of the residents, 5 residents, given subpoenas to appear in court an hour before they needed to get to the courthouse. And one of our residents said that she didn't even know why she was there. So we had, and plus, management had written some letters about this resident that she never saw. Any correspondence that is written about a tenant or accuses a tenant of anything is supposed to be given to the tenant. Did not happen. Landlord could prove it. So when I say that my 17 and a half years of experience being on the board was unusual, it was absolutely unusual, but actually it was very educational. But one thing I have learned is that the kind of relationship residents have with management depends on management and the kind of atmosphere management produces. If management produces an atmosphere of hostility, then residents are going to be fearful. I mean, it's going to take some real chutzpah for people to get together if they feel under threat. If they have a fairly good relationship with management, they're going to feel comfortable setting up a residence council, which we had. But then one thing we learned was to brave out no matter what. No matter what. And we had a property manager who was sending out early move-in notices and charging people $100. So the residents would come to me as secretary. I mean, these were some of these were not in the job description, but what I did, I asked her for her lease. She showed me her lease. I wrote him a letter, and I told him that there is nothing in the lease that says a fee is to be assessed for early move-in. and that if he continued to send her these notices, I will just simply send them to landlord tenant. And at which point I received a letter the next day, which I gave to the resident, and it said that this fee has been rescinded.
I think, Vicky, that underscores an important point, which is why we're so glad you're here with us this evening, that the people who head tenants associations, especially who do it for a while, become the community expert. That you know what's going on, you know what the laws are, you know what you will not take. You know how to advise a tenant who says that this is a problem when it's not really a problem, and you know how to advise a tenant who's got a problem when it is a problem and what to do. And this is what the Renters Alliance hopes will happen in every community, that either there's a few people who know what they're doing, who are the go-to in that community, or there's a tenants association that has that. Vicky, we've only got a few more minutes. Is there a last comment?
Yes, I want to say one thing. Our board president, the board president at Charterhouse, is still active. And I had 21 boxes of documents I had to put into storage because of all the problems at Charterhouse, the floods, the fires, the elevator shutdowns. But I turned over a lot of information to him when I moved to Silver Creek, including the mold. I did my own mold study and found a mold specialist. But I have to give my kudos to Alan Cassidy, because he and the residents basically co-joined with code enforcement, and Alan Cassidy and a code enforcement inspector went to court and filed a formal complaint for their failure to keep the property in standard condition, and they won. So now,
Kudos. And Alan
yes.
Cassidy, if anybody knows him, he's 6'3" and he means business.
6'6", 6'6".
He's big.
Former boxer, 6'6".
Former boxer, and he looks it. And he is a very impressive gentleman. Thank you, Vicky. There's a million permutations. If you live in a building long enough, you'll go through everything. I became head of my tenants association when they tried to evict me. That was a mistake. And so here we are going forward, doing all this. I need to turn to a couple of pieces of important information that we do in all of our town halls. Let me turn to Malek Demir. Could you just give a little brief on what people need to do on code enforcement? Pat, if you could do something on the landlord tenant, and I'll talk a little bit about the ACE program. Go ahead, Malek.
Sure. Well, I just want to tie a bow on what we've been talking about with the tenants association, because ultimately the power of a tenant association lies in empowerment. So as a renter, we are not less than, right? So that's the importance of forming a tenant association. The other thing is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So get geared up. Code enforcement. So when you have issues such as heat, which has come up in the chat room, anything having to do with your refrigerators not working, any mice, pests, anything like that, you need to call code enforcement 311. Code enforcement will tell you, typically they come out within 3 days. Well, first of all, let me go back on that. First of all, you need to notify your property management and give them time. If you find they are not responding in a proper time, what is that, like a week?
Reasonable period of time, depending on what it is.
Yeah. Then you call code enforcement. Again, 311. Code enforcement is pretty good about coming out. If you run into an issue where they're not responding, please give us a call or send us an email at info@rentersalliance.org. The other thing I want to mention is when code enforcement does come out, make sure you get their name and they have a number. So get all the information so that if there's an issue, you can go back and talk to somebody
And follow up. So that's code enforcement for Montgomery County. And Pat, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs? You got to be off mute.
Yes, Alter.
I'll give you that once because I did it. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. But, you can reach them at a number of 311, and you can talk to one of the investigators. They take care of not code, but problems with tenants in terms of the law and what they should have and what they shouldn't have. So it's a separate entity from code enforcement, but they all are at Montgomery County, and you can just call 311 if you don't have a specific number. Tell them what you need, and you should be connected to the department that can help you.
Right. The Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs deals with your rights or your violation of your rights and any violation of your lease.
Yeah.
Can I jump in quickly there
Sure,
on
Nolan.
that point? I recently had an issue with landlord tenant and went back and forth. Long story short, I was so disappointed that my so-called investigator didn't know their law. I had to send them a copy. It said, according to page 5 of your landlord tenant handbook, it says thus and so, and then all of a sudden things turned and worked out.
You see what happens when you become a tenant leader?
No, it's because Matt has taught me to know my rights, and Malek as well, and where to go to find the information.
Mm-hmm.
So just shout out.
And part of the role of the Renters Alliance too, remember, there was no one working in this space exclusively before we came along. There were nonprofits who were doing good to a certain extent of their mission. They worked with tenants a little bit over here. They worked with tenants a little bit over there, but it wasn't exclusively part of their work. So we came along, and part of what we do is also to make sure that you're getting the services that you're entitled to from county and state government. So it used to be when we started the tenants work group back in 2007, which I chaired, 2008, there was no 311. There was no accountability when you called the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. You called somebody, there was no record of your phone call. There was no follow-up on who the investigator was and what they found out and all of those things, which is not to say they didn't from time to time do good work, but there was no accountability for it. And so part of what we do is to make sure that you're getting the services you're entitled to. So if you have a problem with an investigator at landlord tenant or at code, then we can help back you up and advise you whether there's a problem or not, and also make sure you're getting the services you're entitled to. Vicki, we got two more minutes, and I got to wind up with.
Okay, this is very quickly. You didn't mention the fact that the Renters Alliance is focusing on senior properties now, and
that's true. Well,
yeah, you need to say that.
In part why you're here, Vicki.
Right. Well,
you're proving it.
Okay. But what I wanted to say to Nolu is that, and I hear a lot of this, and we experience this too, that and this happens a lot in rental properties where what is advertised is not what's real once we move in. And the honeymoon ends a few months, as you said, a few months after, and especially in senior buildings, in senior buildings, and the complaints, the saying, the lack of respect, especially from younger people who just, and I have to wonder, how do they treat their grandparents? So
yeah,
well,
we have definitely seen that as an issue. We have committed to working in senior properties this year more than we ever have.
Good.
You'll see us around. We'll be holding community meetings focused on senior issues in particular. But also one of the reasons is, first of all, I love working with seniors because seniors don't take it. They say, everybody underestimates their experience, their careers, their skills, their know-how, their maturity. And so getting seniors organized is an organizer's dream. But the other thing is that we're seeing a large number of seniors in Montgomery County and across the state who are now moving into rental housing on fixed incomes with an expectation of stable, affordable, quality housing, and they're not getting it. So that's a problem for us, and that's why we're working in there. We have 30 more seconds.
Okay, can I just say
You have 2 seconds. Go.
Yes. Find out who your your legislators and the people in your communities that can make a difference. Find out what they think about Just Cause. If they don't think enough to vote for something that will improve your quality of life, vote them out of there.
Agreed. Last thing. We are also part of the program called Access to Counsel in Evictions, or ACE. And we're working with the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to ensure that people know who are eligible, meaning that basically low-income people who are facing eviction can get a lawyer. If you are facing eviction and you want to be connected to a lawyer, we're working with the Maryland Legal Aid and with the Homeless Persons Representation Project, even though they don't have a office now in Silver Spring anymore, but they're still an organization that's part of this program. And CASA, particularly for people who are Spanish speaking, they have lawyers as well. So a right to having a lawyer facing eviction, if you're low income, is something that we work to establish, and it does exist. And so stay tuned for that. If you need some help getting a lawyer to defend yourself in court against an eviction, then we can help in that regard. So for everybody, thank you to Nolu, Crockett, and Tonga for your work. And the highs and the lows and the highways and the byways. Thank you, Vicki Price, for all of your work as always. Thanks to our panel. Thanks to Max Wilberg for delivering all those pieces of literature onto everybody's door. And of course, to our treasurer, Josh Fisher, and our staff.